Right now, while you're watching this, your browser is doing something you never asked it to do. It's leaving doors open. Not one door, 10 of them. And somewhere on the other side of those doors, there are people who already know exactly how to walk through them. I want you to stop for a second and think about everything you've done in your browser today. Did you check your email? Log into your bank? Buy something online? Save a password? Every single one of those actions passed through the same piece of software that security researchers just flagged as having 10 high-severity vulnerabilities. That software is Google Chrome. The version is 148. And the word high in cybersecurity doesn't mean worth keeping an eye on. It means attackers can move right now, today, without waiting for you to make a mistake. That's what this video is about. Not vague warnings, not technical jargon designed to confuse you, but a real, honest, human explanation of what these 10 vulnerabilities actually are, what they allow attackers to do to your life, and exactly what you need to do in the next few minutes to protect yourself. Because the people who discover these flaws publish their findings. That's how the system works. Researchers find the hole, they go public to pressure companies to fix it, and then every bad actor on the planet reads that same report. The clock starts ticking the moment the research goes live. And right now, that clock is ticking for you. Let's start with why Chrome is such a high-value target to begin with. Because understanding that changes how seriously you take everything else I'm about to tell you. Chrome isn't just the most popular browser, it's the dominant browser. Over 65% of everyone who uses the internet uses Chrome. That's not a small margin of preference. That's a near monopoly on how the world navigates the web. When you combine that kind of reach with the fact that Chrome is where people do their banking, store their passwords, access their work systems, and manage their entire digital identity, what you have is the single most valuable attack surface on the planet. More than 3 billion devices run Chrome. That means a single, well-crafted exploit doesn't target one person or one company. It can cast a net across billions of potential victims simultaneously. Hackers, criminal organizations, and state-level intelligence operations all understand this math. Chrome vulnerabilities aren't just bugs, they're opportunities at a scale that almost nothing else in the digital world can match. Now let's talk about what's actually wrong with Chrome 148, starting with something called a use-after-free vulnerability. And I promise this is going to make sense, even if you've never heard that phrase before. Every program on your computer uses memory to store information while it's working. Think of it like a whiteboard. Chrome writes information on the whiteboard while it's doing something, and when it's done, it erases that section so the space can be used for something else. A use-after-free flaw means there's a window, sometimes just a fraction of a second, between when Chrome decides it's done with that space and when it actually stops referencing it. In that gap, an attacker who knows the flaw exists can slide their own malicious code into that freed memory. When Chrome then accidentally tries to use that space again, it executes the attacker's code instead of its own. Chrome 148 has multiple instances of this type of flaw spread across different parts of the browser, areas responsible for handling audio, rendering web pages, and managing the tabs you have open. You don't need to click anything suspicious. You don't need to download anything. Visiting a web page that's been specifically designed to exploit this flaw can be enough to trigger it. The second vulnerability lives inside something called the V8 JavaScript engine. And this one matters more than almost any other because V8 isn't a small contained feature of Chrome. It's the core. V8 is the engine that runs virtually every modern website. It's what makes interactive elements work, what handles video playback, what powers the web applications you use every day. When V8 has a problem, the problem doesn't stay neatly contained in one corner of the browser. It has the potential to affect everything Chrome is doing at that moment. The specific flaw found in V8 in this version is called type confusion. In simple terms, it means the engine can be tricked into treating one kind of data as if it were a completely different kind of data. That might sound like a minor clerical error, but the consequences are anything but minor. An attacker can write a JavaScript script, the same kind of code that powers millions of completely legitimate websites, engineered in a way that deliberately causes this confusion. When the confusion happens, the attacker gains the ability to read from or write to areas of memory they were never supposed to be able to touch. Through that access, they can steal information that was supposed to stay private, alter how the browser behaves, or execute code that Chrome would never voluntarily run. What makes this especially dangerous is that the entire attack is invisible. There's no pop-up, no warning message, no slowdown or visible glitch. The website looks completely normal. The browser looks completely normal. And while you're sitting there reading an article or watching a video, code you never authorized is running silently underneath everything you see. The third vulnerability involves what's called a heap overflow, specifically in components of Chrome that handle media processing. Here's what that means in practice. Every program has a designated area of memory it's allowed to work within. a kind of container that holds the data it needs. A heap overflow happens when a program tries to write more data into that container than the container was built to hold. The overflow spills out into neighboring areas of memory. If an attacker can control what data spills and where it lands, they can use that spill to overwrite instructions that the system considers critical, replacing them with their own instructions. When the system executes what it thinks are its own instructions, it's actually running the attacker's commands. This is what security researchers call arbitrary code execution, which translated into plain language means the attacker can make your computer do what they want, not what you want. This particular flaw was discovered and reported by external researchers working outside of Google, which raises an uncomfortable but important question. If the good faith researchers found it, is it possible that someone with less ethical intentions found it first and said nothing? The fourth vulnerability shifts to something that's probably sitting in your browser right now, your extensions. If you use Chrome for any length of time, there's a very high statistical probability that you have at least a few extensions installed. Ad blockers, password managers, productivity tools, translation helpers, shopping assistants. These extensions are given certain permissions to operate within the browser, and they communicate with Chrome's core systems in specific, defined ways. The vulnerability in Chrome 148 allows malicious external code to abuse the communication channel between extensions and the browser's core in ways that were never intended to be possible. Or the implication of that should make you pause. An attacker doesn't necessarily need to trick you into installing something new or something malicious. They could potentially use an extension you already have installed, one you've trusted for months or years, as a conduit to inject commands that the browser should never be receiving. Your perfectly legitimate ad blocker or password manager could, under the right exploit conditions, become an unwitting accomplice. The fifth vulnerability is one that security researchers consider among the most serious in the entire spectrum of browser flaws, a sandbox escape. To understand why this matters so much, you need to understand what the sandbox is supposed to do. Chrome runs web content in an isolated environment called a sandbox. The philosophy behind it is actually quite elegant. Even if something malicious manages to execute inside a browser tab, the sandbox traps it there. It can't reach out to your operating system. It can't touch your files. It can't access your network in ways it shouldn't. The sandbox is the browser's internal immune system, the containment protocol that keeps a problem inside the browser from becoming a problem for your entire computer. A sandbox escape vulnerability breaks that containment. It finds a way through the walls, and once code escapes the sandbox, the rules change completely. The attacker now has potential access not just to what's happening in Chrome, but to your operating system, your file system, your network connections, everything. This is why sandbox escapes consistently receive the most alarm reactions from security professionals, even within the category of high-severity flaws. The blast radius is simply much larger than almost any other type of browser vulnerability. The sixth vulnerability affects how Chrome handles certain file formats when it encounters them on websites, or when a page asks you to download something. The flaw can be triggered during the file processing stage, before you've made any conscious decision about whether to open or interact with that file. Chrome might be processing a preview of a document or loading a specific type of resource embedded in a web page, and that processing itself is enough to trigger the exploit. This has especially significant implications for people who use Chrome in professional environments, where receiving and previewing documents, spreadsheets, and shared files from colleagues is a constant routine activity. The attack surface isn't exotic or unusual scenarios. It's the ordinary workflow of millions of working people every single day. The seventh vulnerability targets something Chrome users rely on constantly without thinking about it much: the autocomplete and form management system. This is the feature that remembers your passwords, fills in your shipping address, stores your credit card number so you don't have to type it again. It's a convenience that has become so embedded in how people use the web that most users barely register it anymore. The vulnerability discovered in Chrome 148 allows malicious websites to interact with this system in ways they should never be permitted to. Specifically, it opens the possibility for a site to read information that Chrome has stored, passwords, card numbers, personal details, without your explicit consent to share that information with that particular site. Think about what that means for a moment. The feature designed to make your life easier and faster has, under this vulnerability, the potential to become the mechanism through which your most sensitive saved information is harvested by sites you never intended to share it with. The eighth vulnerability lives in Chrome's rendering engine, the component that takes the raw code of a web page and transforms it into the visual experience you actually see on your screen. A flaw in the rendering engine can be exploited through content that's been specifically crafted to confuse it. Images that look normal, animations that appear completely ordinary, visual elements that seem like standard parts of a web page. except embedded within them is data structured in a way that tricks the rendering engine into performing operations it was never authorized to perform. What makes this particularly insidious is the delivery mechanism. Attackers can embed this malicious content in places that have no obvious reason for you to distrust them. In advertising that appears on a legitimate news website, in images shared through social media, in emails you open in a web-based mail client inside Chrome. You're not visiting a shady corner of the internet. You're reading the news. And the attack comes from an ad on the sidebar. The ninth vulnerability involves the protocols Chrome uses for secure connections. The system behind the padlock icon in your address bar that signals a website is using encrypted communication. This particular flaw doesn't break the encryption itself. What it does is exploit the way Chrome validates and manages certain types of security certificates. In practice, the consequences can include Chrome being deceived into treating connections as secure when they're not, or accepting certificates it should be rejecting outright. For anyone who has relied on that padlock as a shorthand signal that they're safe to enter sensitive information, this vulnerability introduces a deeply uncomfortable possibility that the signal Chrome is displaying honestly reflects what Chrome believes, but what Chrome believes has been manipulated. Online banking, shopping, private communications, medical records. The padlock that told you it was safe to proceed could, under the right exploit conditions, be a lie that Chrome itself has been convinced to tell. The 10th vulnerability closes out the list by targeting something fundamental to how your browsing sessions actually work: Chrome's cookie and session management system. Cookies are small files that websites use to remember who you are between page loads. They're what keeps you logged into Gmail without having to enter your password every time you open a new tab. They're what remembers your shopping cart on an e-commerce site. They're the digital tokens that prove to a server that you are who you say you are because you already went through authentication. The vulnerability in this area allows attackers to steal active session cookies. And the implications of that are profound. If an attacker obtains your active session cookie for Gmail, or your bank's website, or your social media account, they don't need your password. They don't need your two-factor authentication code. Those authentication steps already happened. The cookie is the proof that they happened. To the server, an attacker presenting your stolen cookie looks exactly like you. This attack has a name, session hijacking, and it's among the hardest types of account takeover to detect precisely because there's nothing anomalous to detect from the server's perspective. The credentials are valid. They're just not being used by the person they were issued to. So now you understand what you're dealing with. 10 distinct vulnerabilities, 10 different attack vectors, 10 separate ways that an adversary could compromise your browser, your data, your accounts, or your entire system. And a fair question to ask at this point is, how does something this serious happen? How does a browser as widely used and as extensively tested as Chrome ship with 10 high-severity flaws in a single version? The honest answer requires holding two things in mind at the same time. Chrome is genuinely sophisticated security software, and the teams that build and test it are among the best in the industry. At the same time, Chrome is a program of almost incomprehensible complexity. Tens of millions of lines of code designed to work with billions of different websites across thousands of hardware configurations and dozens of operating system variations. In a system of that scale and that complexity, vulnerabilities aren't an exceptional failure. They are a statistical inevitability. They will appear. The question is always how quickly they're found and how quickly they're fixed. What separates the truly dangerous situations from the manageable ones is the gap, the time between when a vulnerability exists in the wild and when a patch reaches your device. Security researchers call this the window of exposure. Every hour that Windows stays open is an hour that someone who knows about the flaw can use it. And in the case of Chrome 148, that window has been open for users who haven't yet updated. And depending on when you're watching this, it might still be open for you right now. This is where what you do in the next few minutes actually matters. The first thing to do is find out exactly what version of Chrome you're running. Open Chrome, click the three dots in the upper right corner, go to Help, and then click About Google Chrome. Chrome will display your current version number and automatically check whether an update is available. If there's an update waiting, install it right now, not later, not after you finish what you were doing, right now. Every additional hour spent on a vulnerable version is an additional hour of unnecessary exposure. If Chrome tells you that you're already on the latest version, keep checking back over the following days. Chrome deploys updates in phases, not all at once. So the patched version may not have reached your device yet, even if it exists. While you have that settings menu open, navigate to your extensions. Click More Tools, then Extensions. Look at every single extension listed there. For each one, ask yourself 3 questions. Do I remember installing this? Do I actually use it? Is it from a developer I can verify and trust? If the answer to any of those questions is no, delete it. Not because every unrecognized extension is malicious, but because extensions you don't recognize or use are pure attack surface with no corresponding benefit to you. The fewer extensions you have, the smaller the footprint that vulnerability number 4 can exploit. Beyond the immediate Chrome update, this is genuinely a good moment to reconsider whether Chrome is the right browser for you to rely on exclusively, at least in the short term, while this situation is actively being addressed. Firefox, which is built on a completely different rendering engine, doesn't share the specific vulnerabilities that affect Chrome. Safari on Apple devices operates through its own distinct security architecture. Neither of those browsers is flawless. Every browser has vulnerabilities, but when you know that one specific piece of software has a set of known, actively discussed high-severity flaws, distributing your risk across multiple browsers is a legitimate and sensible security strategy. Use a different browser for your most sensitive tasks. Banking, medical accounts, anything involving financial information, while Chrome gets fully patched. If you haven't yet enabled two-factor authentication on your most important accounts, do it today. This is especially relevant in light of the session hijacking vulnerability. If an attacker manages to steal your session cookie and then tries to make a change to your account, add a new email address, initiate a transfer, access billing information, a second authentication factor creates an additional barrier they'd need to overcome. It doesn't make you invulnerable, but it meaningfully raises the cost and difficulty of a successful attack. Think about every device where Chrome is installed, not just the computer you're using right now, your work laptop, a tablet, maybe a secondary machine you use occasionally. Each device running an unpatched version of Chrome is its own independent exposure point. A vulnerability doesn't care which device it comes through. The impact on your data and your accounts is the same. And then there's something that often gets overlooked in conversations about personal cybersecurity. The people around you, your family members, your colleagues, the people you share accounts or systems with. The statistics are straightforward. The overwhelming majority of people in your life who use a browser use Chrome, and the overwhelming majority of them have no idea the situation exists. In a connected world, the security posture of the people around you affects your security too. If a family member's device gets compromised through an unpatched Chrome vulnerability, and their device has access to shared accounts or shared network resources, your exposure doesn't stop at your own devices. There's something larger at play here that goes beyond Chrome 148 specifically, and it's worth taking a moment to understand it because it changes how you think about all of this going forward. Most people operate with a mental model of cyber attacks that looks something like this. A hacker sits at a computer, identifies a specific target, a company, a high-profile individual, someone with something obviously valuable, and methodically goes after them. And while that kind of targeted attack does exist, it represents a small fraction of what actually happens at scale. The vast majority of successful cyber attacks are not targeted at anyone in particular. They're automated, indiscriminate, and opportunistic. Attackers write tools that scan the internet looking for systems with known vulnerabilities. They don't type in your name. They don't need to know anything about you. They're looking for a specific flaw in a specific software version. And when their scanner finds a device running that vulnerable software, the attack is initiated automatically. You don't need to be a target to become a victim. You only need to be accessible and unpatched. In the language of phishing, it's not a rod and a line cast for a specific fish. It's a net dragged across the ocean floor to collect whatever's there. This is exactly what makes the window of exposure so critical. The moment a vulnerability becomes publicly known, and they do become public because researchers need to publish their findings to create the pressure that gets them fixed. The automated scanners start looking for it. Every device still running the vulnerable version is a fish in that net. The question isn't whether they're scanning. The question is whether your device is there to be found when they do. There's another dimension to this that deserves attention. The difference between an attack you notice immediately and an attack that's designed specifically so that you never notice it. The dramatic version of a cyber attack, sudden loss of access to accounts, money disappearing from a bank, data obviously encrypted by ransomware, is actually the minority. The version that security professionals worry about most is the quiet one. An attacker who gains access through a browser vulnerability and immediately announces themselves as wasted an opportunity. An attacker who gains access and then does absolutely nothing visible has something far more valuable: persistent, undetected presence. They can watch, they can collect, they can wait for the moment when what they're watching becomes maximally useful to them. Your banking password today might not interest them if they know they can take it whenever they want. Your banking password the day you initiate a large transfer. That's worth waiting for. The access itself is the asset, and the longer they can maintain it invisibly, the more value they can extract from it. This is also why the ripple effects of a single compromised account are so much larger than they might initially appear. Your email account isn't just where your messages live, it's the master key to your entire digital identity. Forgot your password? Reset link goes to your email. New device login requires verification. Code goes to your email. Every platform you've ever signed up for treats your email address as the ultimate proof of who you are because it assumes you control that inbox. If an attacker controls your email, they can systematically reset the password to every other account connected to it. Your social media, your streaming services, your cloud storage, your shopping accounts with saved payment methods, your Apple ID or Google account with everything that lives inside them. A single entry point, a browser vulnerability, a stolen session cookie, can be the first domino in a cascade that eventually touches every corner of your digital life. Consider also who is most affected by the kind of awareness gap that makes vulnerabilities like these so exploitable. Older adults who use Chrome to video call their grandchildren, to read the news, to stay connected with the world. They may have no idea that software update notifications represent genuine security needs rather than optional nuisances. Younger people who live on their devices and think of cybersecurity as something that happens to corporations, not to individuals their age. They have the technical comfort, but sometimes not the risk awareness. Working professionals who depend on IT departments to manage their software updates and assume that because they're not in charge of it, it's being handled. They might be running vulnerable software for weeks while the department works through an update rollout. And the parents and partners and siblings of all of these people, whose accounts and networks and shared resources are all connected to those vulnerable devices. There's also a persistent myth worth dismantling that protecting yourself from cybersecurity threats requires significant technical expertise. It doesn't. The most common reasons cyber attacks succeed against individual users have nothing to do with sophisticated technical failures on the part of the victim. They succeed because software wasn't updated, because a link was clicked without verification, because the same password was reused across multiple sites, because two-factor authentication wasn't enabled. None of those things require any technical knowledge to address. They require habits, and habits develop from awareness, from understanding what the actual risks are and why the preventive actions matter. That's what you're building right now. The threat environment has shifted dramatically over the past decade in ways that make these habits more important than they've ever been. Tools and techniques that were once the exclusive domain of nation-state intelligence agencies, the kind of sophisticated exploits that required massive resources and technical teams, are now available for purchase in criminal marketplaces at prices that individual bad actors can afford. Automation has multiplied the scale at which attacks can be deployed. Artificial intelligence is increasingly being used to make attacks more convincing, more adaptive, more difficult to detect, and more personalized in ways that make the old "just don't click on obvious spam" advice insufficient on its own. In this environment, maintaining updated software isn't a basic beginner-level precaution. It's a core line of defense. The vulnerabilities in Chrome 148 aren't hypothetical future risks. They exist now. They've been identified. They've been publicly discussed. Attackers have had access to the same information that triggered this warning. Right now, while you're watching this, there are devices running unpatched Chrome that are being scanned, probed, and potentially compromised. The question that matters is where your devices land on that spectrum. Here's what the next 10 minutes should look like. Open Chrome, check your version, apply any available update immediately, go to your extensions, audit them ruthlessly, and delete anything you can't positively identify and confirm you actually need. Go to the accounts that matter most to you, your primary email, your bank, your password manager, if you use one, and make sure two-factor authentication is active on each of them. If you have Chrome installed on other devices, make a note to check those today too. And then, if you're willing to do one more thing, share what you've learned here with someone who needs to know it. Not because sharing is a nice thing to do, but because in security, awareness shared is protection multiplied. The person in your family who doesn't know this is a vulnerability for everyone connected to them. The version number Chrome 148 is going to be forgotten in a few months. There will be a patch, and then there will be another version. And eventually, this particular set of flaws will be a footnote in the long history of browser security. But the pattern it represents, known vulnerabilities, delayed patches, users unaware of the risk, automated attackers scanning for unprotected systems, that pattern will repeat. It repeats every time there's a new version, a new flaw, a new window of exposure. What doesn't change is the calculus for the individual user. Update when updates are available, be selective about what you install, protect your accounts with multiple layers, and stay informed. You came into this video not knowing about any of this. You're leaving it with a clear understanding of 10 specific ways your browser could be used against you, a clear set of actions to protect yourself, and a framework for thinking about browser security that will serve you well beyond this specific moment. The information you have right now is the most valuable cybersecurity asset you could have. Not software, not a subscription, not a specialized tool, understanding. because you can't protect something you don't know is at risk. Go take care of your browser. Right now, today. The 10 minutes you spend on this are insurance against consequences that could cost you far more than 10 minutes to unravel.